but in reality, Canada is not peaceful. How can it be peaceful when just 4 years ago, my classmate died of tuberculosis? How can it be peaceful when my grandparents went to residential school? How can it be peaceful when I can't go home and drink the tap water because it's contaminated? How can it be peaceful when we had to fight for our land? I remember Chief Bilson also saying, "The white man, he contaminated my waters. I cannot eat the fish. The white man, he chopped down the trees. Where my father used to show me his path, there are no longer trees. You take away my land and you want me to pay for it back when it was never yours in the first place." Everything we have, we had to fight for, and we have never stopped fighting. So I just hope one day that we will finally win the fight, that that wall will be gone, that my voice will finally be heard. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michaela. Samantha, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here with us today. Thank you. I'm very humbled to sit on this panel with you and Susan for inviting me. For me, my understanding of peace education really comes from our experiences with Peaceful Schools International in Belfast, Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, we take a whole community approach with primaries, what we call primaries. They're P1s all the way up to their P7 sometimes. So 4 years old up to 12 years old. I think what Irene said earlier really spoke to me, that we aren't here to empower, we're here to facilitate a skill sets that allows people to make their own decisions about their own communities. So when we teach or when we facilitate peace education in the classrooms, we do the same skill set, same core foundation that we do with the children, we do with youth groups, we do with parents, we do with ex-combatants, we do with politicians, we do with the teachers. Our goal is to bring everyone to the same level of active listening, of negotiation, of conflict resolution, so that they're able to engage in their own dialogues and their own peace building experiences and community building opportunities. For us, that whole community approach being in the classrooms then allows us to be beyond the classrooms. When we build trust in our relationships, to then branch out. We can reach teachers, we can reach parents, we can reach ex-combatants, on and on. So that's what peace education sort of means to me. In terms of a program we're involved in, so we run the Northern Ireland Project Resolution project every year. In 2001, there was a crisis at a primary school in Northern Ireland, in Ardoyne, in Belfast. The Holy Cross Girls Primary School. It's a Catholic school. I use the words Catholic and Protestant, recognizing that the conflict in Northern Ireland really isn't religious by any means, but it is a means of allowing access to this conversation so that we can talk about the division in communities. It's a Catholic primary school situated right in the middle of a very predominant Protestant area. In 2001, after the peace agreement had been signed, we're talking 5-year-old girls walking to school, but there was protests at the school because of the area that I was in. And in those protests, the girls had bricks thrown at them, had towels soaked in urine thrown at them, had all the nastiest of things. They had police escorts in a time where no one really trusted the police. From there, our founder, our president at the time, Hetty Van Group, she called the school and she offered support in friendship and international friendship. And from there, we've been taking a group of university students over to Belfast every year. We started in just Holy Cross Girls Primary School, and we've grown up to 18 schools last year. We have even more that we're planning on going to the next year. And providing the skill set to the children allows us to then provide it to their parents. They go home and talk about what they've learned in school. And yeah, I think that's kind of what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you. I want to start off by following up with Michaela on how inspired and humbled I am to be on this panel. I wish I was there in person to meet you all, but that wasn't going to happen. I also want to start by saying I missed Irene's presentation because I couldn't get in on a link. But I had the opportunity to learn from Irene in Bangkok and study with her. So she is one of my peace educators and one of my mentors in peace building, and someone I've had the opportunity to collaborate with on global initiatives. So I understand when you mention her and what she contributes, and I'm so glad that she was the keynote speaker for this. So what does peace education mean or look like to me? At first, I thought, why am I on this panel? I don't consider myself to be a peace educator. I consider myself to be a peace builder. And then I reflected on the things that I do in peace building and realized it's all about education. It's about education in the way Samantha's talking about it, in the way Michaela's talking about it. And so I've had the opportunity and the privilege to study many different tools of peace building. And when I consider what I do in terms of education, I think my contribution is linking conflict to the root causes, to the social determinants of health, to the SDGs, to the pillars of positive peace. And so the education I do comes in the form of both direct teaching in social justice to advocates and to psychologists, but also to engaging in as Michaela puts, a whole of community, whole of society, and whole of government approach to build understanding about how, for all of us, our attitudes, the structures we build, and the institutions we have can be more peaceful and more resilient against any kind of conflict or crisis that happens. And they can be more resilient if we address, as I have to say, as Samantha you so eloquently put, if we can build a more equitable, inclusive system, both socially, economically, politically, in every sense of the way, addressing those root causes of conflict and lack of peace. So what do I do? So I support the on-the-ground initiatives to provide quality education to girls and women in Afghanistan who are facing much of the same kinds of barriers that our Inuk and our First Nations are. Teaching the concept of positive peace and pillars of peace to community members, organizations, Rotarians, leaders. I engage in social justice advocacy actively through lobbying or through writing opinion pieces. I contribute to policy development and legislation in my own political jurisdiction. So the common thread to all of this is my goal is to broaden the base of peace builders in our communities, increase the capacity for all of those peace builders, each one of you, who, again, with understanding those root causes, can build societal well-being and peace for everyone. I don't know, Steve, if you want me to talk a bit more specifically, but I do want to touch on Afghanistan, because when I was studying with Irene and others in Bangkok, I had to study a conflict, and I studied the issue. I'm a psychologist. I studied the issue of how we develop our own identity about our worthwhileness, and that education we get from the point we're born, through our families, through our societies, through our communities, and globally. And so for me, peace starts in that intrapsychic place of how do we learn our worth? How do we learn about our ability to make a difference? And if we can't understand who we are in that identity and be accepted and equitable, equal and inclusive, how do we ever end up at a peace building table? And again, I think Samantha, you touched on this in a different kind of way. I want to touch just really quickly on what we're doing now, because as you know, Afghanistan is now under the control of the Taliban. It's been 58 weeks that girls are not allowed in school. Obviously, the Taliban sees the education of girls and women as a threat. And that tells me how powerful education is. You put a book in the hands of a girl and she can imagine a different life. She can imagine her abilities. She can create a world. She can see there are other people that she wants to be like, and other mentors, and so on. And I think the Taliban knows this, and the Taliban is using education as a tool for conflict and for power. And we all peace builders use it as a tool for peace. So I'm going to leave it there. I have more to say with your other questions that you're going to be asking us. But again, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Great. Thank you, Susan. And thanks to Samantha. Thanks to all the panelists for what they were sharing. So underlying what I'm hearing, the reason you do peace education is because there's no justice. And you spoke so eloquently about that in your own community, Samantha. And each of the examples, whether it's Northern Ireland, Afghanistan, Newfoundland, Canada as a settler, colonial racist nation that we heard earlier, the need for the need for change. Peace education comes out of that idea of need for change, and it's a process. And I heard the use of dialogue, awareness, connection, but all based on this very clarion call of like, we need justice, we need something different. So how do you make that change? How do you cross that wall? In your case, how do you reach those on that wall, or the folks who are different from us, or have a different position? How do you cross difference in Northern Ireland? How do you cross the difference in Afghanistan? How do you work with the different contexts that you're facing so that people can come to a place where to bring about justice? What does that mean, or how can that take place?
If you want to overcome that wall, you have to look at both sides, the side being blocked by the wall and the people who are blocking the people. And you have to talk. You have to respect one another. Because when you don't respect one another, then you think you can do whatever you want. You have to come to an agreement. You have to look at what happened. You have to acknowledge, and then you have to apologize. It's not something that happens overnight. It's a process. You have to learn, and you have to accept people for who they are and where they come from. You have to change the institutions. You have to change the government, the structures that were built so that we were segregated. You have to take that out of your system, because if you don't take it out of your system, then it will always exist.
In the Northern Ireland context, I'd say we kind of have, there's two things that we start with. We always start with humility, whether it's us coming as outsiders into the Northern Ireland context. Every relationship we built starts with humility. I'd never walk into a Belfast school and say, your school should be integrated, or there should be no more peace walls, or your boys shouldn't be going to bonfires. Those aren't our decisions to make. They're decisions that need to be made within the community, across communities, when everyone has an equitable access to the tools to have those conversations together, where our goal is to provide those tools. The other thing that I've really attached myself to is something that a principal said to me once, my first time in Northern Ireland. This principal, Miss Ashley Galloway, I absolutely love her. She's one of my heroes. She works in Curry Primary, which is a Protestant school, in a interface area. So interface areas are where a Protestant community is back to back with a Catholic community, or vice versa, of course. And Curry Primary is, let's say, this building. The Holy Family Catholic School is like where Gus's pub is, if you're in the room here, maybe a 5-minute walk, not even. And the interface is, let's say, Robie Street. In this community, families wouldn't dare cross the line, some even up to today, but particularly 10, 15 years ago. So her work is often working with families to pass on skills between communities. She very quietly works with the other principal and building relationships in that way. And that quiet, that's the key that she often says. We work on quiet peace building. She says, if you shout too loud, your impact won't be you won't be as impactful. And so I think that quiet peace building is really where things begin. It's the opportunity to say, hey, I know this person who you might want to chat with. You could create a program that might benefit your students or might benefit your parents. We don't always need to include the media. We don't always need to include the politicians who want things to go one way or another. Quietly on the ground, that's how it starts, and it will eventually build to what they want it to be.
Thank you. So when I was studying, I learned about Elise Boulding, who was the first person to speak about women in peace building. And a quote I like to use from Elise about this, about how do we bridge differences, is every interaction we have with someone is an opportunity for peace or for conflict, because every single person is different than we are in some way. And so I think by drawing upon curiosity and what I call unknowing what we think we know about another, and learning and building relationships through learning and curiosity and asking and understanding what each person's experience of threat is and what's important to them, we can build those bridges on an individual level. I think I had the opportunity to develop a program for Venezuelan refugees in Trinidad, where there was a lot of conflict because the influx of refugees in Trinidad from Venezuela is huge, millions of people. And what we did there was we had the Venezuelan community and the Trinidadian community come together and share food and teach each other about their customs and their food and traditions. And then they did some conflict resolution training, and then they developed a business project together so that they could gain some economic stability and sustainability for the refugee population that wasn't allowed to work otherwise, and build community in that way. So I don't think you can force people to come together, but I think you can help people celebrate their differences and see their differences as strengthening the community in general. The other thing I want to touch on is the need to really authentically engage in truth and reconciliation. And, I'm not an expert in obviously in Indigenous experiences, but I think as a settler, we need to play our part authentically in following through with the call for truth and reconciliation. And there's been examples throughout the world about how that works. And as Michaela says, how it needs to be community driven and determined by what the harmed community indicates is what they need for healing and for moving on and for bringing forth their culture, just as the Venezuelans do in Trinidad. So those are just some ideas. It's looking at what connects us and increasing that. It looks at what divides us and decreasing that to simplify it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm hearing among the things I'm hearing you all share are whether it's acknowledging, facing what happened, truth and reconciliation, changing institutions on the need for justice and connection. But I'm also hearing within that this idea, you didn't express it exactly in these words, but the creating connection is about creating that empathy so that we actually see one another and can understand where we're coming from and creating that relationship. So I'm wondering if each of you has like a story about a particular success whether it's your own success in finding your voice and bringing your voice forward, or success in a project that you were involved in that kind of exemplifies this, so people can ground it in like something really tangible and real.
In August, as I was saying, I went to the Yukon, and the point of the conference was to bring people who were non-Indigenous and people who were Indigenous. So it was this big group. We were staying at cabins, and we went to these sessions with elders, with chiefs, and we learned about one another. We learned about their history. They knew the reality. So there was these people who had no clue about residential schools, people from Switzerland, people from in Canada. So you had this whole group of people. And the goal of this was to reconcile and to understand, to work towards that goal of making things better and repairing the bridge. So that was something that went really well. We all went in a circle, and all the Indigenous people shared their residential school stories, and then the non-Indigenous people, they replied and they sympathized with us. We all worked together, and then we knew this is finally going in the right direction.
It's okay. I'd like to switch hats a little bit, and I'll talk about karate instead. I'm a karate instructor, and I have 35 children between the age of 4 and 12 who I instruct weekly. And we have in our dojo, we have what we call DojoCon, and they're like our mission statement. There's 4 of them, and it's like, seek your true self and respect your teachers and things like that. We're learning them very slowly to recite them in Japanese and English and understand what it means to them. One of my favorites is first, faith, belief, loyalty to your teachers, or as we translate that into kind of their own language of English, is respect anyone who has something to teach you. And at first that was a little bit hard to understand. They're like, oh, we have teachers, we have you, we have our parents, that's it. And I wanted them to understand that their peers can teach them, that the orange belt who's standing next to them can teach them, that the neighborhood kids can teach them, that everyone has something to teach them. And just last night, I was at class and we were going through it. I wanted them to give an example of something they learned from someone else and how they respected that person as being their teacher. And one little kid, he looks at me and he goes, well, I taught myself something this week. I was my own teacher, and then I was kind to myself because I taught myself that. And I just thought that he took this lesson that I was taught by someone else, and he applied it in such a new context. I felt so wonderful about that. I thought it was such a successful moment for him and for our school, and to have the other kids hear that. And I share this story in the greater context of him creating empathy for himself and creating empathy for those around him. And really what I want my karate kids to understand is that they're part of this community. I teach just down here at the George Dixon Community Center, which I hope is that way. Maybe it's that way, somewhere in here, in this area. Yeah, that way. Okay, well, thank you. And I have a very diverse, very energetic group of kids who are respect each other more than I could ever wish for. And I'm really grateful for these learning moments that they can teach each other to build their own community. So yeah, that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. I struggle with this because success is so hard to manage when you're in it for the long game, or to measure when you're in it for the long game. But so if I can do a couple, one thing that I did, collaborated with Irene Santiago on, was the peace tables worldwide. And she had initiated a women's peace table movement, which brought women in conflict zones to parallel peace tables to discuss what needed to happen in their communities or their countries to build peace when they were not invited to the table. Women weren't at the peace negotiating tables. And so in 2016, I joined with Irene to broaden that to a peace table worldwide, which was about bringing women to every table where decisions for the health of a family or organization or community or a country women could be brought to those tables. And that year we had over 120 tables at over 40 countries in the world. And as I say, it's hard to measure how successful that was, but I do know some of those groups that got together during that time are still going, and some of them are very vocal in terms of bringing diverse voices to the decision-making tables, especially as they relate to the health of the community. So I see that as a success. And the other area is, even though girls can't go to school in Afghanistan, our organization trained over 8,000 teachers before the Taliban took over. Girls got a quality education. We provided the first ever digital online education resource. So people can still get that under, I hate to say it, anywhere the Taliban might be listening, but people can still access that education resource, and girls are still getting an education, even if it's clandestine and in unofficial schools. And out of all that training and all of that education that girls were able to have, we have raised so many leaders, women leaders in Afghanistan, who are working globally in peace building projects. So I think that's a huge success for the organization, which is not me, but a whole lot of people and a whole lot of Afghan people. So I see that as a success. And again, it's long-term. Will it bring peace to Afghanistan? I hope in the long term. Women are protesting there in a way they never did before. And I think that's due to the education that they received. So thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the three of you, what you were sharing.